Welcome back to the Moonlit Nook. Tonight we follow Alveric and Lyrazel as they cross the boundary between the timeless beauty of Elfland and the familiar fields of Earth. It's a chapter of wonder and change, of things both lost and found, a place where wild roses bloom and time slips quietly away. Chapter 4. Alveric comes back to Earth after many years. Back through the guarding wood went Alveric and Lyrazel. She only looked once more at those flowers and lawns, seen only by the furthest traveling fancies of Poest in deepest sleep, then urging Alveric on, he choosing the way past trees he'd disenchanted. And she would not let him delay, even to choose his path, but kept urging him away from the palace that is only told of in song. And the other trees began to come lumbering toward them from beyond the lustrous, unromantic line that Alveric's sword had smitten, looking queerly as they came at their stricken comrades, whose listless branches drooped without magic or mystery. And as the moving trees came near, Lyrazel would hold up her hand, and they all halted and came no more, and still she urged upon Alveric to hasten. She knew her father would climb the brazen stairs of one of those silver spires. She knew he would soon come out onto a high balcony. She knew what rune he would chant. She heard the sound of his footsteps ascending, ringing now through the wood. They fled over the plain beyond the wood, all through the blue everlasting elven day, and again she looked over her shoulder and urged Alveric on. The Elf King's feet boomed slow on the thousand brazen steps, and she hoped to reach the barrier of twilight, which on that side was smoky and dull, when suddenly, as she looked for the 100th time at the distant balconies of the glittering spires, she saw a door begin to open high up, above the palace only told of in song. She cried, "Alas!" to Alveric, but at that moment the scent of briar roses came drifting to them from the fields we know. Alveric knew not fatigue, for he was young, nor she, for she was ageless. They rushed forward, he taking her hand. The Elf King lifted his beard, and just as he began to intone a rune that only once may be uttered, against which nothing from our fields can avail, they were through the frontier of the twilight, and the rune shook and troubled those lands in which Lyrazel walked no longer. When Lyrazel looked upon the fields we know, as strange to her as once they have been to us, their beauty delighted her. She laughed to see the haystacks and loved their quaintness. A lark was singing, and Lyrazel spoke to it, and the lark seemed not to understand. But she turned to the other glories of our fields, for all were new to her, and forgot the lark. It was curiously no longer the season of bluebells, for all the foxgloves were blooming, and May was gone, and the wild roses were there. Alveric never understood this. It was early morning, and the sun was shining, giving soft colors to those fields. And Lyrazel rejoiced in those fields of ours, at more common things than one might believe there were amongst the familiar sights of Earth's every day. So glad she was, so gay with her cries of surprise and her laughter, that there seemed henceforth to Alveric a beauty that he had never dreamt of in buttercups, and a humor in carts that he'd never thought of before. Each moment she found was a cry of joyous discovery, some treasure of earth that he had not known to be fair. And then as he watched her bringing a beauty to our fields more delicate even than that the wild roses brought, he saw that her crown of ice had melted away. And thus she came from the palace that only may be told of in song, over the fields of which I need not tell, for they were the familiar fields of earth, that the ages changed but little and only for a while, and came at evening with Alveric to his home. All was changed in the castle of Earl. In the gateway they met a guardian whom Alveric knew. The man wondered to see them. In the hall and upon the stairway they met some that tended the castle, who turned their heads in surprise. He turned to Lyrazel and told her how 10 or 12 years were gone. But it was as though a humble man who had wed an earthly princess should tell her he had lost sixpence. Time had no value or meaning to Lyrazel, and she was untroubled to hear of the lost 10 years. She did not dream of what time could mean to us. They told Alveric that his father was long since dead, and one told him how he died happy, without impatience, trusting to Alveric to accomplish his bidding, for he had known somewhat of the ways of Elfland, and knew that those that traffic twixt here and there must have something of that calm in which Elfland forever dreams. Up the valley, ringing late, they heard the blacksmith's work. The blacksmith was he who had been the spokesman of those who went to the long red room to the Lord of Earl. And all these men yet lived for time, though it moved over the Vale of Earl, as over the fields we know, moved gently, not as in our cities. Thence Alveric and Lyrazel went to the holy place of the friar, and when they found him, Alveric asked the friar to wed them with Christum rites. And when the friar saw the beauty of Lyrazel flash amid the common things in his little holy place, for he'd ornamented the walls of his house with knickknacks that he sometimes bought at fairs, he feared at once that she was of no mortal line. And when he asked her whence she came, and she happily answered Elfland, the good man clasped his hands and told her earnestly how all in that land dwelt beyond salvation. But she smiled, for while in Elfland she'd always been idly happy, and now she only cared for Alveric. The friar went then to his book to see what should be done. For a long time he read in silence, but for his breathing, while Alveric and Leerzel stood before him, and at last he found in his book a form of service for the wedding of a mermaid that had forsaken the sea, though the good book told not of Elfland, and this he said would suffice, for that the mermaids dwelled equally with the elf folk beyond thought of salvation. So he sent for his bell and his tapers, as are necessary, and then turning to Leerzel, he bade her forsake and forswear and solemnly renounce all things pertaining to Elfland, reading slowly out of a book the words to be used on this wholesome occasion. Good friar, naught set in these fields can cross the barrier of Elfland. And while that is so, for my father has 3 runes that could blast this book when he answers one of his spells, or any word able to pass through the frontier of the twilight. I will spell no spells with my father. But I cannot wed Christum Man, the friar replied, with one of the stubborn, who dwell beyond salvation. But then Alveric implored her, and she did say the say in the book. Though my father could blast a spell, she added, if it ever crossed one of his runes. And the bell being now brought and the tapers, the good man wedded them in his little house with the rites that are proper for the wedding of a mermaid that hath forsaken the sea. Thank you for joining me on this passage from Spellbound Twilight into the Fields We Know. As Leerzel and Alveric begin their life together beyond the borders of song, we're reminded how wonder and mystery walk quietly beside us, even when time moves on. If you're enjoying this journey, I'd love for you to leave a little star of your own, whether it's a like, a comment, or a cozy share with someone who needs a touch of magic tonight. Until next time, may your dreams be gentle and your heart stay curious.